During the pandemic, many businesses have gone out of business or have had trouble staying alive. Many sectors of the economy have suffered, but there is one particular one that has boomed and has boomed a lot in Mexico City particularly, which is the delivery. It's part of the gig economy, so-called. And we want to know what this gig economy is and what these services are, because what happens when you order 50 pizzas? Who is the person delivering them to you, and what precarious situation might they go through in order to bring you these 50 pizzas to your door? That is what we will talk about today in this new episode of Future Frame TV with Alejandra Haas. Alejandra is the director of Oxfam Mexico, and they have recently, together with the Inequality Research Institute, INDECIG, in Mexico, published a report on the gig economy, which is called This Does Not Apply. And Ale is going to talk with us about the challenges for these delivery people, but also what it means for the apps, for the companies behind them, for the customers to operate in an environment like Mexico City. Join us for this conversation. I'm Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel. We hope you enjoy. Welcome to the program, Alejandra.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, and it's a pleasure to talk with you about your Oxfam's and INDECIG's new report, a very comprehensive study of something that is called the gig economy and that is often mentioned, and we kind of have an idea what it might be. Everybody's participating in it somehow. But could you explain, to begin with, what this gig economy actually is, what it means, who participates in it more directly, and then we'll go into the results of the great report that you published.
Perfect. So when we speak about the gig economy, it's this kind of work that is very typical of the 21st century, but I think it's always existed, particularly in Mexico. And it's about people that are not employed full-time with the same company, and rather they work on demand. And so in this case, we're talking about platforms, electronic platforms that have built sort of a service economy around giving people what they need, particularly during the pandemic. What we saw is people not leaving their homes, but even before, people were, not taking taxis anymore and taking what we now call Ubers, but there's a multiplicity of other companies that also work in that kind of sector where there's drivers with their own cars that get called by an application on people's phones. And if they're close by, then they go pick someone up and take them to their destination. But in this case, particularly, this report focuses on people that bring food, particularly from restaurants, to people's homes. And so that became very, very popular during the pandemic in Mexico. Mexico wasn't very restrictive in terms of people leaving their homes. There was no sort of real lockdown for Mexicans. It wasn't government enforced. But at the same time, we did have some limitations in terms of access to supermarkets or even restaurants being able to open at certain parts of the pandemic. And so the business really grew. It grew to benefit workers, certainly, people that were out of jobs or were not able to resume studies and needed some extra income or some income. In some cases, it is their main income. It also grew to benefit restaurants themselves who had to either close or didn't have any customers and needed to get their food out to their customers. And so, if you have a small restaurant and you don't have the possibility of developing your own service, it was really helpful. But it also benefited shareholders of those companies, right? So the percentage that stays with the company is very, very high. And the shareholders did have huge growth in their income thanks to this new market, let's say. As I said, it's been always there. It's always been there. But I think with the pandemic, we saw an exponential growth.
And we see specifically this growth of what we could call intermediaries, maybe, the companies that channel the services from the suppliers of the services that are, in this case, the delivery people and the suppliers of the goods, so there's two suppliers, I guess, of the food in this case, and then the customers that want to get this service. Could you say something more about these intermediaries and what their role is, and what their particular situation maybe in Mexico is, how they connect supply and demand?
Supply and demand. Yes, I mean, the main thing is that there's some international companies, particularly Uber, Didi as well. And then there's more Latin American based companies like Rappi, right? So, but the model is basically very similar. The model is that it's a company that doesn't, as you say, they're intermediaries. They don't in themselves sell anything, except that they provide a platform to get the supply and the demand together, and to be able to contact the delivery person so that the person knows that they need to take a certain thing from point A to point B. And that, as I said before, has grown in terms of the market for restaurants. I think food is the main thing, but there's also some branching out into other things like unprepared food, like supermarkets that, also have their own delivery, but sometimes also use some of these platforms to get to their customers through a very similar service. Then other companies have developed their own delivery service, for example, for pharmacy goods or even stationery. So what we've seen is really a multiplication of companies that supply that have all sorts of products that want to make them available to their customers, and also increasing needs of customers to get things taken to their homes or to their offices.
So are we seeing the future here? Is this what we will be doing now that you say the branching out? Will all services and all goods go through these systems? And if not, why not? To get into the results of your report.
So, I mean, I don't think that people will stop going to the high street or will not go to restaurants or go themselves to the supermarket. I think people will still go. But I think the main thing is that we've lived through a phase of lockdown or difficulty getting out, and we've realized that it can be very, very comfortable and easier, particularly in a big city like Mexico City, which is so complicated, has a lot of traffic, and sometimes the cost of moving around or going to get something that you need at a certain point doesn't really make sense. So I think we will see a growth that will continue. I think the branching out can go on. But I think one important point of this is that the branching out doesn't only mean in terms of goods to people. It might also mean a branching out of the labor model, which is at the basis of our report. The important thing here is the relationship, or at least for us, is the relationship of those platforms with the delivery people. And I think that's another development that we'll see in the future. And I think it's happened in some other countries, where instead of people working for a specific company and having a history with that company, a labor relationship with that company, and all of that it entails, having a relationship where there's sort of a, I'm going to use this word, but it is, we would need to go into it with more detail, more freedom from both sides, right? So the company does not commit to hiring a person. The company contacts a person that says that they can do the work, and they put them in contact with a customer, right? So what does a company provide to the customer? The company provides some safety, some security, the idea that you can trust the person that you're contacting to actually get you the stuff that you bought, but also maybe quality, so how fast they can arrive, and that you can track them down with an app and see where they're going, and you can sort of program at what time they're going to get to you with the things that you bought. And it provides the delivery person, some degree of access to the first thing is access to a market, right? So how would the delivery person know that someone wants to buy something they wouldn't? So access to market, access to goods, and access to clients, right? So what I was saying before is, I think the other export or the other development that we'll see is maybe other types of engagement between customers and services, not necessarily deliveries. So you could have a situation in which, instead of having let's say a firm of lawyers, right, you could see in the future having an app where you could find a lawyer that is an independent worker that could give you the legal service that you need, provided that they have some level of engagement with the company that is, putting them in their, I'm going to say, catalog, right? It's not for goods, but it's for people. So they have a catalog of lawyers, and you could sort of, go through a similar situation, a similar app to hire someone by the hour, let's say, to do legal work or to do design work, for example. So what we are seeing is how this model potentially can become a way in which people can engage in doing work, but not through the classic relationship of employee and employer.
So let's get into this freedom issue. I mean, it sounds very, very good and very liberating to not be bound by restrictions and have freedom of choosing the hours that one wants to work and taking the job or not. But clearly there's a certain precariousness attached to it. And there is a joke about the academic world where they say we choose academics because to work in academics because there's freedom of choosing when to work. And then the answer to that is you can choose the 18 hours a day that you want to work. Freely, right? So is a positive choice. But for these services or for this sector, for this gig economy on large, there are very different precariousnesses attached. Could you get a little bit into what these problems might be and also how they connect to the specific profile of most of those people that currently work in these services? Because they're probably different, or they are different from a lawyer that can fill in their extra hours through an app, for example, and else work in an office where they're highly paid and where they have security, etc. And that's maybe not the case for most of these delivery people.
That's right. So I think the freedom side is what actually the platforms sell. That's their narrative. It's like you are working, first of all, they say you're working for a technology company. Or rather, you are a partner, because this is sort of the way in which they build the narrative, at least in Mexico, is that the delivery people are partners, right? And that they have the freedom to choose whenever they want to work. They have the freedom to choose the geographical space in which they want to work. They have the freedom to choose what ways of transport they want to use, what hours of the day. And so it's like flexible work at the tips of your fingers, right? Where you can make some extra cash. The problem is that a lot of these, so there's a few problems. Let me go one after the other. We're talking about around 350,000 people engaged in this kind of work in Mexico. Not all work all of the hours, but many do. And that's the first thing that we were able sort of to debunk from the narrative of the company. It is rarely the case that people will have this as an extra job, because actually, a lot of people that have been engaged in this kind of work are people who have this as their primary source of income. So that's a first. The second one is that you can work any hours that you want. In fact, what we heard from people, so we interviewed around 32 people in depth, and then we had more than 1,000 answer our survey. What we heard from them is that they need to connect many hours during the day. So even if they don't access work, they need to be available in the platform so that they can actually have some work and get enough volume to get enough income, right? And so, even though it might seem very freeing just to have your phone and do whatever you need to do, and then whenever the job comes up, you just get up and you go and do it. Actually, you need to be looking at your phone and you need to be free. You need to have the time to do it. And so, the freedom there is very, very limited. The other thing related to time is that a lot of the work comes during weekends. holidays, or even the evenings, right? And so it's a time where it's not safe for everyone to go outside. Women, for example, told us that it was really unsafe for them to be out on the street in the evenings. Particularly women with children couldn't do that. A lot of them go with their children to do the work, and so they wouldn't be able to do that for security reasons during the night. And so it becomes complicated. It doesn't feel like it's a very freeing experience. The other thing is the income. So if this is not a person's only income, let's say, what we saw is that when people have this as their primary source of income or their only source of income, 55% of the people that we surveyed said they would not have enough income to pay for their needs or their families. So by the standard of the income that they reported in the survey, we came up with this number. And in the case of women, 63% in the survey answered that they would not be able to pay for the main needs of them and their families with the income that they have, which is 2,000 pesos a week. And the other thing is that they have other expenses. So it's not like you get the money for yourself or for your needs and then you're free to go. You don't, many times, not in all companies, but many times you have zero insurance. Certainly you do not have social security, because in Mexico, social security is associated with having formal work, and this is not formal work. So you're not registered. And this is a problem that you could argue is an institutional sort of structural problem of Mexican policy. And absolutely, that's the case. We should not have a system in which health and daycare for kids and so many other things are attached to having formal work. But this is a space and this is the economy in which these companies have settled. And so this is a reality in which people live. And so and then the other expenses, you need to pay for your own transport. So if you have a bicycle, if you have a motorcycle, you need to pay for whatever, all of the expenses associated with your mode of transportation. And then we also saw some more expenses that were in many cases catastrophic for deliverers, which were related to, for example, accidents or, being sick. So in the same sense that you do not have access to social security, you do not have the possibility of getting paid if you're not working. So if you get COVID, for example, and you're 2 or 3 weeks out of the street because you need to stay home and recover, you would not have any income whatsoever to cover neither for your medical expenses nor for, just the cost of living during that time. So it does become much more complicated than what it seems. I always say that the gig economy, and in this case, the delivery experience is not at all a person related to a technology company. What it is actually is sort of the oldest job in the world, which is taking something from point A to point B, right? But the whole narrative around freedom, around being in a technology company, around being able to choose your own thing, but also having the cost of being in a precarious situation is not very well ingrained into that narrative.
And there's also a geographical perspective to it, right? People go to specific areas, and you mentioned the issue of security, which is, of course, a tremendous importance in a place like Mexico City, probably also in other places, which shapes the profile of these delivery people, where they come from, where they go to, and who they are.
Yeah, I mean, 25% of people in the delivery service in Mexico are in and around Mexico City. So certainly we have specificity in terms of, a big city that needs these services. There's a lot of people consuming and using these services. But I think, one of the things that we saw is there's people from all ages, which is also from my point of view, an expression of discrimination in the labor market. So people that are older, that will not get jobs anywhere else, or that have lost their jobs during the pandemic and have not recovered them. And so they engage in delivery as a way of making some money. I mean, there is at least that, it does provide people that normally would be discriminated by the labor market a certain window of opportunity. Then women as well. So many services in Mexico are attached to having formal work. And so if you're a woman and you do not have formal work, which is normally the case because Mexican women even if they do have daycare, they normally have most of the sort of hours of taking care of the elderly or doing the housework by themselves. They do not really share with men or with the state those kind of responsibilities. They have needed in general for decades, for centuries, to have informal work, let's say work that does not imply them to be in an office from 9 to 5, right? And so in this situation, it attracts a lot of women who are already in a very difficult situation because they need to have, all of these hours available to be able to accommodate all of the family's needs. So they have that kind of, very long hours of work within the home and outside of the home. But then on top of that, they have the precariousness from not having formal work. And so they're not only responsible for the hours, but also they have no certainty that they are going to get a job. They have no certainty that they are going to get some sort of social security, even insurance. I mean, some companies do offer one type of insurance. At least, one of them I know offers accident insurance, but it doesn't really cover the whole trip. So it's not from your home to your home. It's from the time that you take the thing from point A to point B. But the rest of the time, you're not covered by that insurance. So there's a lot of risk attached to this kind of work. There's also no conditions for maternity leave or any of those things that are normally considered within labor rights.
We're building up a labor history, right? I mean, in the future, it kind of perpetuates itself, this model, because people won't have access to pensions and will have to continue working in old age, even under these precarious situation.
Exactly. And I think that's a huge problem in Mexico in and of itself. There's more than 50% of people at a working age that are informal workers already. And what is worrying is that the promise of formal work, which was sort of the 1950s promise of public policy in Mexico, which was let's build this huge social security institution that will have all of the workers protected, covered with all of these things, including pensions. And now we're going to, we're leaving that model, but we never actually reached a significant percentage of people covered by that kind of institution. So basically what we're seeing is really the combination of the policies and the institutions in Mexico with this model of informal work is sort of a marriage made in hell, if I may, in terms of having sort of the model of the companies does fit very well into the already pervasive precariousness of Mexican working life.
And there was a high risk also related to sickness, right? And you mentioned this before. Health insurance is a problem, of course, is a general issue in Mexico, but is an issue specifically for people that are not provided with this kind of service from their employers. And during the pandemic, there was of course, I imagine, significantly higher risk for delivery people or personnel to get infected with COVID also. And you already said that there is no coverage for people when they get sick. But for example, I remember that there are apps where you can order COVID tests and they will take them in your home. What happens in a situation like that? I mean, how do they deal with their health, How do they shield themselves or hedge their risks?
Yeah, I mean, that the whole thing is very complicated because, they are frontline workers, right? They are what we started seeing during the pandemic as frontline workers, is the people that allow us to go on living even during lockdown, even during, taking a lot of risk for all of us to be able to continue our lives. And the people like me that have the privilege of working from home and being able to, do whatever it is that you do and get paid for it from your home with an internet connection. Well, that's not the case for these delivery workers. As I said, it's the reality for many other workers in Mexico. So, in Mexico, we have the person that sells some tacos in the corner, or the person that would, sell the tortillas or has a small business. And small business owners are not necessarily people that are much better off than, that people that work in these apps. But the whole risk associated with COVID in a country that has this kind of labor market is much higher than in other labor markets where you started out with more formality in your workforce. So that's one thing. The other thing I think that we could talk about is the relationship between the whole being on the street kind of thing. So one of the things that people said in the interviews is they do like being outside on the street. They like working outside. It's nice. It's an opportunity to, get some air, not being sitting in an office or inside a building. And they do appreciate that, some of them. But there are risks, and they talked about it. Particularly Mexico City is quite a brutal city. If some of you have visited, you'll see that there's a lot of traffic. We have some bike lanes, and we have a better culture of bike lanes in the last, let's say, 15 years. But it's still quite brutal, still quite intense. And there's a lot of demands related to security on the streets. Not only security from accidents and from traffic, but also from, common criminality, which also is a risk for them because they are carrying, they don't carry cash, which is, maybe a good thing, but they do carry goods. And so that could also put them in danger. So if you start seeing these profiles, as you said before, women that have kids, or maybe elderly people that walk, that need to walk because they can't ride a bicycle. So you start seeing that there are people in the delivery world that are better off than others just by their age, their gender, or any other thing. Just one note on women, because I think it's important to point this out. Some women also reported that they have been assaulted in the homes where they take the goods. And that's something terrible that we saw. They reported that they had known or themselves had been victims of assault, because normally the apps tell you whether it's a man or a woman. They give you their name. So, people, basically many men opening doors without any clothes on and trying to assault the woman that arrived to the delivery. But also a worrying trend where they feel that there's no response from the company. So, if they had, raised a complaint and said to the company, the app, that they had been assaulted, they would not necessarily receive some sort of, response from the company. And they're all very scared of being dropped by the company. And because the algorithm is secret and nobody knows why you get on your phone, the announcement that there is work, the algorithm is totally controlled by the company. And so people do not really know, if they speak out about their rights, they might get, less work, or if they, raise a complaint for a case of assault, or, even cases where they got, a person was telling us, he was asked to bring, 15 or 20 pizzas to a home, right? And so if you're on a bicycle and you're carrying your bag, how can you bring 20 pizzas to someone's home? But if you don't do it, or you take more time, or you need to do the trip twice, then you're in a big problem, because you might get dropped by the algorithm if you have a bad review. So it's really complicated. I mean, they do not have a lot of space. And just to add insult to injury, so hard to get organized, because they work by themselves. It's a very individual work. It was hard to get them to answer the survey. We did have to do quite a complex methodology to be able to have a good number. And 1,000 is a very decent number. It's a good number. But it is hard to organize. I mean, when do you have time to get together with your peers and discuss? And so the possibility of unionizing, and also unionizing when you're not a worker in the traditional way that we conceive work, is very, very difficult.
There might be some hints to how this could be done in recent efforts to organize informal workers that are domestic workers. Maybe this is a direction for future delivery workers as well. But as you say, it's extremely hard, especially when you're at the mercy of algorithms and basically your customers or the consumers of these services, right? And you already mentioned that some have very strange ways of answering the door or mistreating the workers in other ways. I'd like you to say a little bit more about who the customers are actually and what the relationship with them is. Maybe workers in your survey answered something about how they were treated besides these like more extreme cases, but how is the relationship between customers and these workers in general?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that we didn't do a survey on specifically the consumers, but there is a degree of reporting, not only from the consumers, but also from, for example, malls, right? So if the restaurant is within a mall, or even restaurants that are self-standing, a lot of the delivery people told us that they would not get access to the bathrooms. So that's another problem. If you're doing deliveries during the day and you need to access a bathroom, and the restaurant to which you're giving the service does not let you go to the bathroom, then you could spend the whole day needing to go and having even developing some medical condition due to not being able to go to the bathroom. So that's one of the problems that they told us about. But the other one is discrimination. So, for example, getting into malls is a problem. Some malls have a policy that they will not let people in the regular door. And so sometimes you have to walk around a huge building to be able to access and then walk within the mall to find the place where you need to take the delivery. So it is the customers, but it's also the restaurants and the whole infrastructure that makes it hard. And then there's the discrimination side. So people not being sensitive to, or being sensitive in a bad way, or being discriminatory. And about this. Discrimination in Mexico is pervasive. There's prejudice for skin color, gender related, the way that you look. A lot of people that have tattoos suffer discrimination. Young people suffer a lot of discrimination, right? And so all of these types of discrimination, which are quite common in Mexico, in sort of the way that we treat each other on the street, in schools, in the workplace, everywhere, also have an impact in people's lives. So if you're moving around and you're a person that is, again, taking something from point A to point B, you're constantly exposed to being discriminated.
Besides the discrimination aspect and the security aspect and the precariousness aspect and, well, a range of risks and issues attached to working under these conditions, there's also the question, and you mentioned this to some degree a moment ago, about income, and that relates to the commissions that delivery people or personnel it's not personnel, they're not employed, but people working under these or in these companies, the commissions that they have to pay towards the companies. Could you say a little bit more about how just or high or low or good they are, and what they imply for the workers?
Yeah, so I think, the commissions are not great. There's three parts in this. There's the app that takes a percentage, the restaurant that takes a percentage, and then the worker that gets the rest. The commissions are not high enough. As I said, we have a report. The report says that they make around 2,000 pesos if they're working full time a week, which is quite low. And considering that they have all of the other expenses that I mentioned. So one of the things that they said is we need more clarity on how those commissions are designed. And also there's a possibility in the app of giving people a tip. But the app takes a percentage of the tip as well. And so it becomes really problematic because the customer doesn't really know that the tip will not go directly and in full to the worker. Now, the company might argue, well, we process the payment. Every payment that we process needs, an overhead to make the app work. But at the same time, it's sort of a bit of a lie to the customer. In the same sense, I think that restaurants have been doing this so much, right? So in Mexico, at least you hear a lot of waiters say to you, well, if you could give us a tip in cash, then that would be better because then we can split it among ourselves, but not necessarily split it with the restaurant owner, right?
Which defies the whole idea of the tip, right?
Exactly.
That it goes to the restaurant owner.
You would really like to know as a customer, what tip are people really getting, and whether there's a way in which you could pay for that tip in full to the worker, right? There's an interesting thing, I think, which is I just saw a spot made by one of the companies where they say that the center of their sort of philosophy is around the delivery person, right? So they're sort of trying to put the delivery person at the center, which is great in terms of communication. It's good. It's good that they put the worker in the middle, in the center. But I think it also needs to not become some whitewashing of the reality of those workers. So, we need to be aware that these changes are deep and true and profound. You asked me before about other examples or things that, we can take forward to change this kind of situation. I think, there's a structural change that we need to see in Mexico. First of all, I think the most significant change would be to separate the provision of medical services or health to people regardless of their working status. And that's something that is not necessarily related to these companies, but to all of the Mexican economy. And that's, I think, one of the big policy changes that we need to see. But then we need to also see and to have the discussion around workers' rights related to these companies. Now, we've seen some discussions in the UK, in Spain, with different results where some of the companies have pulled out or have, not pulled out in general because they would not want to lose a big market. But in certain cases, they have said, at least, that they're losing too much money and they're not able to operate if all of the workers are paid in full as workers, right? So that's one of the things that they've said. But what I found is that they are really waiting to see how far the government entities want to go. There were some public statements, and I know that the Mexican government is going forward. Both the government in Mexico City and the federal government are very keen on regulating, which is great. And they're also very keen on answering some of the worries related to road security. So that's good. We'll see. We hope that it will happen. We're expecting to see there are already some legislative initiatives in Congress, around 7 or 8 from different parties. But I think the labor minister is quite interested in going forward to regulating this market. And what she said is she has seen in some of the companies the openness to discuss. I think after being very, very resistant in other markets, they saw that they might, lose more than they're prepared to lose. And so I can see that they're more prepared to at least be open to a discussion and be able to influence the outcome rather than being very, very strict around not wanting any kind of relationship. I think as we go forward, the importance of this agenda, and you were talking about domestic workers, which is an agenda that is very close to my heart as well. I think domestic workers have sort of inspired all of the informal workers in Mexico in that change is possible. The thing with domestic workers is that their argument was always that they are doing work and that they have a work relationship with their employers. And that the fact that Mexican society saw domestic work as, informal work or more of a, let's say, a family relationship in which a person lives in your home and you treat them like a daughter, but they're never really anything close to a daughter, of course. And I say it in feminine because they're mostly 95% are women. And sort of the change of the narrative that domestic workers were able to convey and to represent in Mexico, which is we are workers and we have rights as workers and we need to be treated as workers, really inspired all of the informal workers. So I think that's a way. But the problem is that what domestic workers achieved is to have a specific regime within the Mexican Institute of Social Security that has its own specificities and ways in which you can register. And that's great and it's good. Although, we would like many more to be covered, but, it's a work in progress and it's taken a long time everywhere around the globe. The thing is, how many sectors are you going to have in these specific categories? So does it make sense to then have more than 50% of the working population in specific categories adapted to their work, or to rethink? And I think that's the Oxfam sort of way of seeing things, is we need to separate the big structural changes that need to happen. So going back to the creation of a care system, that also responds to the needs of the population, the possibility of having women and men and the state take care of the people that need to be taken care of in a more equal way. The possibility of having access to your right to health without needing to have formal work attached to it. And then the whole discussion on pensions, aside from a discussion on work. So what is the future of work, how people are going to be employed, who is making the profits, and how we do that. And that takes us, Alice, unfortunately, because everybody hates this topic, but it's a topic that we cannot avoid, which is taxes. So these companies, as many other Mexican-based companies or companies based in Mexico, whatever their origin, do not pay a lot of taxes. Mexico is a country that is not able to collect enough taxes. We've relied a lot on the energy income for a big part of our budget. Only 13% of our GDP comes from taxation, which is really low. So yeah, I mean, one of the other issues is we need to make sure that these companies are properly taxed so that the state is able to provide all of the services that we need for people to be covered, right? And so it is not only about creating sort of the platform's own coverage for social security or accidents, right? It's about having a state that is strong enough to be able to provide for a plan for a decent retirement, the possibility of having a care system, the possibility of having a health system that works for everyone. And these are companies, as I said in the beginning, that are high growth. And so they should also be taxed properly. And I don't think they are, because as I said, Mexico is not a country that really is great at collecting taxes because the percentages are low and the income tax is low, particularly for high income earners. And the deliverers are getting taxed. They are absolutely getting taxed. The company does report how much they make, and they need to hire their own accountant and to do their paperwork. So that's another cost and another area in which the poorest of the whole network, let's say, is paying their taxes, whereas people that are making a lot of money from the same business are not necessarily being taxed properly. So that's another policy area that needs to be looked at.
So the agenda or the environment that you describe here with these tiny adjustments of building a healthcare system that is inclusive and a social security system and the tax system that works. And well, there's an area of opportunity, let's say, and an agenda to be followed. But Ale, maybe before we come to close, could you give a last recommendation for people using these apps, if they can, and how they could, in that case, help to improve the situation for these workers?
Sure. I think consumers have a lot of power, and I think Mexican consumers haven't really realized how much power they have. So jump into our report. The report is at Oxfam Mexico's webpage. It's also available on Instagram, on Twitter, at Oxfam Mexico. So if you want to jump into the report, you'll see that we have sort of a comparison between companies. And so you're able to pick and choose which one makes the most sense. Cheaper is not always better. Remember that. The other thing is being able to decide if you want to tip people. That would also be great. Be mindful that people, particularly in the rainy season, are very exposed to accidents or to situations that put them in danger. So be patient. Sometimes if your pizza is 15 minutes later, but it's pouring outside, you have to understand it's a human being that is bringing the pizza to you. And then also asking the companies for better treatment and being able to sort of question the ways in which people are treated by the companies that you're choosing to provide you with the service. Again, I think consumers are very, very important. When we launched the report, Alice, we had the opportunity of setting up a sort of an experience for people. We set up a couple of bikes in the middle of a public park in Mexico City. We gave people a bag that is around 5 kilos, which is more or less what they carry in general. And we put them some headphones to listen to stories while you cycle, while you carry. So people were very, very thankful that they were able to sort of be sensitive to this experience. A lot of people on social media told us, we never thought about it. This is really important. We've used these services so much, and we never sort of thought about the experience of living this. And sort of as a closing, I think that the contribution we want to make from Oxfam is that, when you ask people that are living the situation, how they feel, what their life is like and what they want, you get a lot of information, from firsthand that indicates where policy should go. I think policy should go where people need it to go. And this report, we hope, is an indication of the road ahead.
Ale, thank you so much for the report and for sharing the results with us here and enlightening us about an area that some people might not have thought about in this way. We appreciate that you're with us here on the program. And we also thank you very much for watching another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel. And we hope that you want to join us again next time for another episode of talking about all things inequality. If you like this, you might subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or you want to comment, share, like our other videos. Have a look at the other channels as well. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alice.